Welcome to today's ghost story. Corn brings scary things. My name's Brett, and I'm a farmer in southern Oregon. I changed the name of my town because I still work this land, and I'd rather not have people showing up with cameras and flashlights. What I'm about to tell you happened on Halloween night in 2017, and to this day,
It's the wildest thing I've ever lived through. Now, before all this,
I never put much stock in talking about the unexplained. Sure, I'd hear stories, catch those late-night shows on TV, even laugh with friends about Bigfoot sightings or strange lights in the sky. Cryptids were just something you told around a campfire to spook the kids, entertainment. But that year changed me. Since then, I've found myself diving into podcasts, YouTube channels, even books and old newspaper clippings, anything that touched on cryptids or folklore. Something I once thought of as harmless fun has turned into something closer to an obsession. Now it is more like research from my college days, because after what happened here on my farm,
I needed answers and I'm not sure I'll ever find them, but I can tell you what happened. Now, I should warn you, I'm a talker.
my family tells me I get carried away with details, and maybe they're right. But to me, a story like this doesn't make sense without the backstory. So if you're not the type who enjoys hearing about family history and farmland and leaves horrid, scathing reviews because you were warned and didn't listen, then maybe this story isn't for you.
But if you stick with me, I promise it'll all matter by the end. This farm goes way back.
It is little over 325 acres in the beginning, and south side of our property butts up against a gully. It was first worked by my great-grandpa in the late 1800s. Dirt and sweat built this place. My grandpa inherited it when he was still just a teenager himself. He took it upon himself to help his mum raise his brothers and sisters right here when his father passed. He worked the ground, putting food on the table, until they all grew up and left to build their own lives. My grandpa stayed. He had 6 kids, 3 sets of twins, if you can believe it. First 2 aunts, then 2 more aunts, and finally a pair of uncles. And then, about 20 years later, in his mid-40s, my grandparents had my dad. By then, the older kids were grown and gone, and my dad was left more or less like an only child. His brothers and sisters called him the oops baby. It didn't bother him. He had nieces and nephews his age who came around often, and to him, they were like brothers and sisters. My dad ended up carrying the farm. Most everyone eventually started careers and their families moved away.
None of them wanted to be tied down to potatoes and wheat.
My dad, however, married his high school sweetheart. I was born shortly a year after, and my 2 younger sisters 8 and 10 years later. So when I was young, it was my dad who ran the farm.
And Grandpa, he was always there too. Stronger than men half his age.
He lived to be 101, and he passed on this very property not long after the story I'm about to share. I spent nearly every summer working side by side with my grandpa. But when I was 17, he was already in his early 80s, but you wouldn't have known it by looking at him. I remember standing there in the barn, sweat running into my eyes, barely able to lift a single hay bale off the ground. Those things weighed near 100 pounds apiece, and I was grunting and stumbling like a fool, trying to move them. Grandpa, though, he'd climb up on top of the stack like it was nothing, boots balanced on the bales 10 feet off the ground, and just start tossing them down one after another. Strong, steady, never complaining. I'd be bent over catching my breath while he was still working like a man half his age.
I'll never forget that.
At 17, I looked up to him like he was made out of iron. Another important piece of this story is our neighbor. I always called him Old Man Johnson, though my dad and my aunts and uncles called him Hal. They didn't care for him much, mostly because of old history. When my aunts and uncles were kids, they used to sneak over and play in his barn, the one that's not there anymore.
One time they nearly lit the place on fire.
After that, Hal never looked at them the same. My dad was younger, closer in age to Hal's youngest, but guilt by association carried over. With me, though, it was different. For the longest time, Hal didn't have any grandkids of his own. He took a kind of liking to me, almost like I was an unspoken grandson. He'd sit on his porch and tell me stories about when my aunts and uncles were wild, heathen kids, or about how my dad got into mischief. He'd spin a tale like no one else. He'd tell me scary stories, which I liked most. Now, my grandparents and Hal and his wife, they were always good friends.
I should say that.
My grandpa was the steady one, the potato and alfalfa guy. That's all he ever grew, and he was proud of it. Corn wasn't his thing, but Hal, he did the same for the longest time, but when I was young, he signed a contract with a company to grow corn for local markets. He took pride in his crop. He'd talk about how our valley's fields looked better than anything they showed in that old movie, Children of the Corn. The strange part was, Hal only grew it once.
He just stopped cold turkey.
He stuck to alfalfa, wheat, and barley. He never touched corn again. I asked him about it once, since I loved corn on the cob. Hal just shook his head, and my grandpa, who was sitting by him, cut him off before he could answer.
All he'd say was, corn brings scary things. At the time, I figured they were just trying to spook me.
But looking back, they meant it. When Old Man Johnson and his wife passed away, that's when things shifted. His kids hardly came to visit, and nobody really knew what happened with them for years. They always called because they were on the phone all the time when he wasn't farming. I always assumed they moved far away, made a life somewhere else, and never looked back at the farm. But when Hal died, the will left everything to them, and they resurfaced. Now, they didn't want the place. They didn't want the work, and they didn't want to sell it either. That's more common than you'd think. Some folks don't have it in them to let go of the land their family built, even if they've got no interest in farming it themselves. They came over and met with my grandpa and my dad and struck a deal. We'd work his ground along with ours. They'd get a small portion of the income, just enough to cover the taxes and keep it in their family, and we'd keep the rest for our labor and expenses. In a way, it worked out for everyone. That's how our farm grew to the size it is now. Between our original acres and Johnson's, it added up to a good 600, enough to catch the eye of outside buyers who would stop by every once in a while. To me as a teenager, it was just more fields to get lost in, more work under the sun. Now, I remember back when I was a teenager, I'd sometimes go looking for my dad. Maybe I had a question about schoolwork, or just wanted to ask him something about chores. And more than once, I'd find him and Grandpa sitting outside, deep in conversation. They rarely heard me come up. Now I was raised not to interrupt. You waited until grown folks acknowledged you, so I'd just stand there a few steps back, hands in my pockets, waiting for them to notice me. And while I waited, I'd catch pieces of what they were saying. Sometimes it was ordinary talk between Dad and Grandpa. Wells, ditches, irrigation lines, or Old Man Johnson's place. But other times, it was different. Grandpa's voice would drop low, like he didn't want even the walls to hear him. Grandpa: "Son, remember I told you when I was a teen they dynamited those lava tube entrances shut in the gully? Town folks used to wander down there and get themselves lost for days. Several folks died in there. They'd never found their bodies. Well, every time those things show up, I swear we find a new opening just south of the river where those entrances were. And half the time, they're lined with black hair. Dad: you really think they tunnel out when Hal's grew the corn?" Grandpa: "No, boy. Not just Hal. When I grew corn too."
Even now, I think they live in the lava tubes. They're still under us.
"Those tubes run for many miles."
And when we fertilize for corn, all that nitrogen, I think it seeps into the caves.
Pushes them out. That's why they appear only around here and on no one else's farm. My dad went quiet for a long time before speaking again. "Dad, come on. Seriously? You're saying an upright walking wolf?"
That's what Johnson thought he saw.
Grandpa's voice hardened. "Grandpa, not some wolf, son."
A massive thing.
"Black as night. It walks upright like a man when it wants to. The first time I saw one, it scared the hell out of me. It took me 12 years to figure out when I had corn in my crop rotation those showed up. You always ask me, but you're a grown man now. If you want to know the truth, grow the corn, and you'll find out for yourself, or call your older brothers."
They saw them too, scared them so bad they didn't go outside for a month. Then there was a pause.
A chair scraped. Grandpa's tone shifted suddenly. Grandpa:
"Oh, hey, Brett, didn't see you standing there." I never got the full story when I was younger.
Later on, as I grew older, I realized Dad was just as curious about it as I was. Grandpa never volunteered more than those half-stories. Back then, it was just old men's talk.
I didn't know what to make of this big wolf, or why they whispered about something standing upright in the corn.
I remember staying up late one night and watching the movie called The Silver Bullet. My grandpa was over reading the newspaper, and when he saw the werewolf on the TV, he went pale white. He asked my dad, "Have you let him watch this stuff?" My dad just replied, "It is only a movie." Now back to when I mentioned Hal signing a contract for growing corn for the local markets. I recall being woken in the middle of the night by the sound of my grandparents' phone ringing. On the farm, it is dead quiet after dark. No traffic, no TV noise, just crickets and the occasional hum of the well pump. So when that old rotary dial phone went off in their house, you could hear it across the yard like a fire alarm. Next thing, I'd hear my grandpa moving around outside, and then the truck would crank to life. He'd have his rifle with a flashlight on it and head out down the dirt roads between the fields. My dad would join in. I'd sit at my bedroom window and watch the glow of the spotlights moving across the rows, sometimes sweeping through the wheat that butted up against Hal's corn.
Old Man Johnson's wouldn't be far off, his light bobbing through the dark like they were running a search together. At the time, I figured it was coyotes or maybe a mountain lion after the livestock.
We had more animals then, pigs, cattle, chickens. These days it's just a few hens for eggs and meat, but back then it was enough that predators took notice, and yet certain things stand out now. Nights when Grandpa came back muttering to my dad as he slammed the truck door,
"I told him no damn corn." Another time, when I slipped outside to sneak a look, I caught him swearing at my dad. Damn Hal won't listen, but he needs to cancel that contract. One night after the phone rang,
my grandpa was outside and my grandma was in the doorway when Old Man Johnson pulled up and said frantically, "One carried off my pig, the big one."
the other one got the baby calf. Later that night, when my grandpa and dad came back,
My dad just asked, as they walked towards my grandpa's place, "What's the strongest drink you have?"
I think I will need two to forget those things. That memory stuck in my gut even then. Pigs I could understand. Coyotes love pigs.
But a calf gone in the night, carried off. I was 12 at the time and didn't fully understand. That was the last time I recall Hal growing corn. Southern Oregon's got its share of critters, don't get me wrong. Grandpa used to tell me he saw a black bear once when he was a kid. He said it left scat in the driveway one night and was gone the next.
He never saw one again down this way.
Mountain lions, though, they'd pass through now and then. In the mid-90s, we had a winter so bad the snow touched the rooftops. That drove the animals down out of the hills, desperate for food. A cougar broke into our chicken coop. By the time my dad and Grandpa got out there with their shotguns, it had killed nearly all of them. They put it down, and I remember standing there, staring at it in the cold. It was the first time I ever saw a mountain lion up close.
I couldn't believe the size of it.
Grandpa just shook his head and said, "That one's starving."
A healthy cat would have been twice as heavy, but when they're starving,
They are twice as dangerous. That stuck with me. I'm not so sure those late-night calls. Those spotlights moving across the fields were about coyotes or mountain lions. The way Grandpa whispered to my dad about a wolf running upright. The way they always hushed up when I came around. My dad asking for the strongest drink. I knew they were talking about something else, but never knew what. I'd come home school and recall asking Grandpa why we didn't grow corn, and he'd always give me the same line again. Corn brings scary things. Like I said, back then I thought it was to scare me, but now I know better. Fast forward 20 years, Grandpa was too old for the heavy work. In his late 80s, he tore both rotator cuffs, and the doctors said surgery wasn't worth the risk. By his 90s, he needed a hip replacement, but again, no go. So he stuck closer to the house, hobbling out to the garden with a wheelbarrow, tending small plots of potatoes, carrots, and strawberries. It kept him in the dirt, even if his big farming days were behind him. By that time, we'd already taken over Johnson's land. Grandpa had worked it alongside Dad for years, right up until his shoulders and hip gave out.
After that, it was mostly my dad keeping things going with hired help. As for me, I wasn't around much then.
I'd gone off to college in Ridgeview, a town about 30 miles away. Where I grew up, we were lucky to have a small grocery store and gas station with a new convenience store and a handful of shops, like a fabric store, a realty office, a few mechanic shops, a few tourist spots talking about the natural lava tubes, but not much else. Our post office was about the size of a school classroom. Going to college felt like a different world, even if it was just a town over. Upon graduating, a few of us in my graduating class started a marketing firm in 2010. That marketing firm really started to take off. This was back when the internet felt simpler and we were chasing all the new adventures and marketing ventures. What started as 6 of us grew into 20 or 30 of us.
I was one of the originals.
By 2014, the company had grown to nearly 70, with a bulk working online from Portland, Oregon. The other founders set their eyes on relocating up near Portland, expanding, and merging with another company. I went with them to get a feel for it. I'd been to Portland before, family trips up the coast, Tillamook, Astoria, the touristy stuff, but never lived there. And the truth is, I didn't care for it. The tall buildings, the cramped apartments, the cost of everything.
It just didn't feel right.
As much as I wanted to stay with the firm, but relocating became non-negotiable with the merge. So they bought out my portion as one of the founders, and I came home in 2015. My dad had been running farm along with a few hired local teenage boys to help with hay and other jobs, but they were just about to graduate high school, so my coming back worked out. My dad asked me to help keep things running until he could find new hands, or until I figured out what was next for myself. Now, I told you earlier my dad married his high school sweetheart, my mum. They built a good life here.
I knew my dad always had this itch to do something else.
He'd talk about going to college, even later in life. One night, while we were working late, he told me how proud he was of me for trying something different, for getting off the farm. Truth be told, it felt good to be back home, and I had enough money to live comfortably for quite a bit, and it hit me. I could run the farm and give my dad a break to go pursue his dream, so I talked with my mum and we worked it out.
Dad would go to college and I'd handle the farm.
He jumped in head first. He moved out and rented a place in Ridgeview, took full semesters year-round, working toward a business degree and his real estate license. My dad's idea was simple but smart. Start a realty business from the ground up. Our area only had one small office in town, run by folks older than him who weren't keeping up with the times. Meanwhile, things were changing. Where there used to be nothing but farms, houses were starting to appear. 10-15 miles out, you could see the neighborhoods creeping in. When local farmers passed away, their kids sold off the land, and suddenly there was development where there used to be rows of crops. My dad figured if he could get a business going strong here, the Pineview County folks would use him since he knew them all. And for 2 years, that's exactly what he worked toward. And me?
I slipped back into farming life like I'd never left. I just picked up where he left off. But man, I've got to tell you, those machines.
They were workhorses, but they were old. Grandpa's last big purchases were back in the 70s. We're talking machines that could run forever if you kept a grease gun handy and a wrench in your pocket. But they were slow and very out of date. Imagine this. Planting with an old 6-row planter, manual-driven tractor versus a 16 or even 24 rows GPS-guided. What took me a day, a new rig could do before lunch. Same with combines. Our old one chewed through maybe 2 acres an hour on a good day. New combines with 12-row heads will do 4, 5, even more. That's the difference between fighting for 3, maybe 4 weeks and wrapping up in under 10 days. So I drove down to the dealer in the college town I knew, figured I'd just look. I'd been in those stores plenty as a kid, knew most of the guys there by name.
And when I walked the lot and saw the price tags, I about hit the floor.
I mean, I knew things had climbed, but seeing a new combine stickered at $500,000, a brand new tractor for $200,000. No wonder my dad or grandpa never bought new equipment. Our land's been paid off for decades, and taking a loan against it scared the hell out of me. Sure, you've got crop insurance, but one bad year and you're sunk. So I wasn't sure what to do. But that severance package from the firm came to mind. Like I said, I was with the firm from the ground up, and when they bought me out, it was a handsome sum. Enough to buy new equipment and have a little left over. Now, I didn't buy the brand new models. I went with last year's units the dealer still had on the lot, saved about 150 grand. Even then, the number just about took my breath away. I'd never written a check so big, but truth be told, it was the bank who wrote it. I told myself I was being smart, saving big, buying them outright. But the truth is, the whole way home I kept thinking, if this gamble doesn't pay off, I've just sunk everything into a pile of iron and paint. I picked up a John Deere 8R tractor, GPS ready, good horsepower for pulling a big planter. Got myself a Case IH combine with a 12-row corn head, even though Grandpa never grew corn because it was part of the local rotation package. For the wheat, there was a new air seeder, tight rows, efficient, none of that guesswork of the old drills. And for potatoes, a 2-row harvester could have gone bigger. But it was miles ahead of what we'd painstakingly run that year in 2016. The new equipment I bought, I parked it up shiny in front of the house, and I was finally catching my breath. My grandpa, I think, was more excited than I, and my dad told me I was nuts. To top off that year, I was able to do something my grandpa hadn't done since my teen years: a controlled burn. The Department of Environmental Quality approved my burn permit, so I lit off sections of the farm and watched the smoke rise into the valley. The smell of it brought back memories of standing beside Grandpa, watching whole rows go up with a match and a shovel in hand. I was standing there, watching smoke curl over the tilled ground, when I saw a gleaming white truck roll up my drive. Big, spotless, not a speck of mud on the tires. My first thought was, great. Some city boy from one of those new developments came to complain about the smoke. He's going to call the sheriff, the fire department, tell me it's ruining his air. But that wasn't it. Out steps a tall man with a big gut squeezed into a light grey suit. He wore one of those wide 55-gallon hats that looked brand new, like it had never seen a day of work. He came striding toward me, grinning, his hand outstretched like he was closing a deal before I even said hello. "You must be Mr. Thompson. You run these crops?"
I explained it was family land and I was the one tending the fields now.
He looked me up and down, his smile stretching even wider. "So you're the one making the decisions?"
I nodded, and then that salesman tone rolled in.
You ever buy a car and the guy tries to talk like your best friend?
That's what this was.
Only this one was trying to sound like a cowboy, with a fake drawl and even a boy howdy tossed in for good measure. I had to bite my lip not to laugh. He introduced himself as Mr. Withers. He said he was from the Midwest, worked for a corn seed company. He told me they were looking for new test ground outside the Corn Belt, places like Oregon, California, Washington, and they had a brand new hybrid seed they had for trial. According to him, it was going to revolutionize the industry. He laid it all out. The seed would be free, I'd get cash up front for signing, and all he asked was that I follow their data program. They'd give me a well meter to track water use, and I'd need to log stalk height, number of ears per plant, ear length, cob fill, moisture, the works. Weekly measurements, photographs, you know the digital paperwork. "And here's the kicker," he said, leaning in like he was telling me a secret. "Guaranteed return. Doesn't matter how the crop yields. You get paid this flat rate period. You can't lose." I'll admit it sounded almost too good to be true. But I had a degree in marketing, and I knew marketing pitches when I heard them. So I told him to leave the contract. That evening I drove it over to a buddy of mine, a lawyer I'd gone to college with. We sat down and went through it line by line. He leaned back and said, "Brett, this thing's airtight. They pay you no matter what, as long as you do their weekly log sheets. It's legit." Now here's where it got really tempting. Corn seed costs a fortune compared to what we were used to. To plant our ground in potatoes, I was spending 20 to 25 grand just on seed.
Wheat, another 5 to 8 grand depending on the year.
But this guy was offering me hundreds of acres of seed for free, plus cash up front, which X amount per acre, and no risk. With new equipment, I wanted to save money any way I could. Then that old line my grandpa used to say flickered through my head. Corn brings scary things. I even chuckled to myself, remembering it. But I had that new combine with a corn head attachment I'd picked up bundled in with the tractor.
I figured, why not?
I'd always wanted to try my hand at corn, so in the fall of 2016, I signed with Mr. Withers. When I told my grandpa, he just shook his head and said, "I ain't going there again."
Let them come.
You'll see. As for my parents, since they moved, they couldn't be happier at the business break this deal provided. But my dad's voice was reserved, and that's how the stage was set for the summer of 2017. The funny thing about contracts is, even when you read them cover to cover, you don't always catch the way something is worded or interpreted until the time comes. I only saw Mr. Withers a handful of times after that. Most of the time it was company reps or researchers coming out. They brought all the seed, sat me down at the kitchen table, and went over the whole schedule. What I'd misread was the watering. Not when I watered, but how. The contract gave them control. They wanted my well metered. I knew that, but they wanted the corn watered on their schedule, not mine. It didn't matter what I thought. They sampled the soil and told me flat out the pH had to be at least 6.0, closer to 6.5 if I wanted that corn to take. Ours was a little off, leaning acidic, so they said I'd need to put down lime and a round of fertilizer to balance it. My cost, not theirs. Wasn't the end of the world, but it wasn't pocket change either. Then came the water. Corn's a thirsty crop, drinks about 20 inches a season, and they wanted it on their schedule, not mine. I had to swap out sprinkler heads on my lines just to hit the gallons per minute they were asking for. Again, my cost. I did the work, planted on their timetable in the spring, and from then on it was nothing but data, data, data. Measure stalk height, measure leaf width, count ears per stalk, photograph everything. They even gave me an iPad with their software loaded on it, so I could shoot the pictures and upload them straight to their cloud.
Emails, calls, sometimes even FaceTimes asking me to double-check a measurement.
It was farming, sure, but it felt more like I was a lab tech out in the dirt. And I'll be honest, that corn shot up fast. Corn can grow 1 to 2 inches a day under good conditions.
This stuff.
Some days I swore I could see it stretch while I stood there. By June it was chest high.
By July it was well over my head.
By August, it was 12 feet in places, double my height. But it wasn't just the growth that stuck with me. After those first fertilizer applications and a few weeks in, things started to feel
off. At night I'd hear howls carrying closer to our farm.
Too deep for coyotes, but I brushed them off. Then one morning, when the corn was still young, I found tracks at the far end of the field near Old Man Johnson's place. 2 sets of massive prints, and beside them at least 2 or 3 smaller ones. At the time I convinced myself they had to be coyotes, maybe just big ones, after all. That summer was full of hype about the big eclipse coming in August, and folks kept saying animals were acting strange everywhere, their instincts all spun up. I told myself it was just nature playing tricks, like how dogs bark before a storm, or livestock get restless before an earthquake. Easier to believe that than the alternative. Then came the heat. Mid-June into July, we had a streak of nearly 110-degree days, and I hated their watering schedule. They had me irrigating in the middle of the day, when the sun was cooking the ground. I told them it was scorching the plants, the water acting like magnifying glass lenses on the leaves. They told me to follow the program. Mid-June through August brought more than just heat. In June, 2 of our neighbors' calves vanished. Days later, their heads and lower legs turned up several miles away, left neat as if drop.
Our own chicken coop was hit soon after.
The door latch was gouged, almost pried. One hen was mangled in the yard. The rest survived but stopped laying for weeks, spooked beyond fixing. By July, a farm further down the river found a full-grown horse slaughtered at the edge of its pasture. The ground was black with blood, the fence bent low where something had stepped through. A week later, the hatchery pools were raided. Dozens of fish gone without a ripple, no fence, no footprints left behind. In August, pigs disappeared from the southern end of the river. In the mud, farmers found massive prints too wide for cats, too long for dog. But the ground was too soft to hold detail. Deer carcasses started showing up in fields as farmers started to harvest, bodies twisted, half-eaten. It kept happening. No pattern, no explanation. Farmers muttered about mountain lions or bears. The sheriff called it strange animal behavior. Some blamed it on the heat wave, others blamed the eclipse. None of the attacks were ever tied together during those months. Some reports went to animal control, others to fish and game, a few to the sheriff, and plenty were never filed at all. Word of mouth travelled, but not quickly enough. With the heat wave in full swing, the ears of corn came in. They were pitiful. Some stalks threw no ears at all. Others had tiny, half-formed cobs, a few scattered kernels at the base, the rest blank. Still the stalks kept growing. I'm 6'2", and that corn made me feel small as it grew past 12-odd. Every time I was in those green walls of corn collecting data, without fail, I'd hear my grandpa's voice in the back of my mind. Corn brings scary things. And it did. More than once I walked face first into one of those big orb-weaver spider webs that was strung up between stalks. Sometimes I'd lean on a plant to jot down a note and feel an earwig or two crawl down my shirt. By late August, I was sure I'd sunk myself. I thought for sure there was some wording hidden in that contract that would leave me holding the bag, out the money I'd spent on equipment. Dad would have shaken his head and told me I'd been played. But I was wrong. The company held true. Reps came out in early September with their clipboards and instruments, took measurements, collected samples, and told me straight up the crop wasn't worth harvesting. They logged the failure, packed up, and cut me the check, just like the contract said. No grain, no yield, but money in hand. On their last day, they had several random samples to gather, complete with taking them back to the lab with them. One sample was on the backside of the property near the river. The lab tech headed to the back. Several minutes later, he came running back, screaming that there was a huge black dog.
After he caught his breath, he said it had walked into the row he was in.
I told him it wasn't a dog, but most likely a coyote, only for him to respond that he didn't know coyotes didn't have tails and yellow eyes. After that, I was ready to fire up the new combine and cut that worthless corn down. The ears weren't worth a dime, and all it was doing was standing there drying in the sun.
That's when my buddy came by.
I'd grown up with him, his family ran a junkyard, and we'd spent half our teenage years tinkering with parts out there. He still had this monster truck we'd pieced together in high school. Big old Bronco body sitting on top of scrap parts his dad had welded together for a rodeo show. Tires as tall as me, multicolour painted underbody, the whole 9 yards. It was ugly, but he loved that thing. He gave one look at my fields and grinned. "Brett," he said, "I'll give you $100 right now if you let me drive through the corn." I laughed in his face. Told him the stalks were dry, his hot muffle would light my field on fire. He smirked and doubled down.
200. I slapped him on the shoulder.
"Come on," I said. "We'll take it up into the woods, tear up some mud. Safer that way." So that's what we did. Spent the afternoon four-buying, climbing over rocks, spinning through creek beds, just like we were still 17. But when we came up on the east ridge, the mountain opened out. From there you could see my farm spread wide below, and just off in the distance another corn farm I knew well. That farmer sold his crop locally to grocery stores and co-ops and had a corn maze each year. My buddy looked at me, then back at my land. I could tell we were thinking the same thing. "Brett," he said, "you know what you're going to do, right? You're not cutting that down." "Not yet." I grinned and said, "I know." "We're going to build a corn maze." His face lit up like Christmas morning.
"No," he said, "we're not just building a corn maze.
"We're going to build the biggest, best corn maze this town has ever seen. People drive in from miles to see it." We kept riding. Mud, splashing up the sides of the Bronco, but our minds were running faster than the truck. Maze designs, trails, dead ends, maybe even a haunted section. I think we had more fun dreaming up that maze than we did tearing up the woods. At first, the plan was simple. One big maze. But I'd seen enough of those flop. People get lost too fast, or they get bored, or the logistics just don't work out.
So we rethought it.
What we ended up with was 3 mazes tiered by difficulty. The first one was for kids. A small section cut in the shape of a pumpkin. Bright and simple, just enough to give families a laugh without scaring anyone. From there, it connected into the next level, a big UFO-shaped maze, broad and winding across nearly 10 acres. That one had lights, sounds, even scarecrows on poles. But the crown jewel was the big one. 20 acres by 20 acres, a monster of a maze. I didn't want to rent light towers or string up a power grid, so my buddy pitched the best idea he ever had. Make it a dark maze.
No lights? Bring your own flashlight if you wanted to go in.
That turned it into the brave one, the maze everyone dared each other to try. We had a tight schedule, so we got to work fast. That next night, I pulled out some of my old marketing contacts, spread the word online, and started hunting for a design. I was at the gas station grabbing a soda when I spotted one of those travel magazines with crosswords, puzzles, and little mazes inside.
I flipped through it and thought, why not?
Ended up piecing together 4 mazes into one big design. My buddy flew his drone over the field, and together we plotted it out section by section. Problem was, cutting 20 acres of paths through thick, dried-out corn wasn't something I could do alone, so I drove over to the school. It was a K-12, and the principal was the same as when I was there. I asked if I could talk to the senior classes. I needed bodies to help cut and lay the maze. He chuckled, said good luck, that every kid was tied up with football, cheer, or after-school jobs. But he walked me into 2 classrooms anyway. First class was interested, but the students said they hardly had time with practice and games. The second class belonged to Mr. Kilsmeyer, who was the coach and economics teacher. I gave the same pitch.
I got the same reaction, but then the coach raised his hand.
What's the deal with your corn, Brett?
I heard you're not harvesting it.
I told him the story that it was a failed crop, worthless to harvest. He grinned and said, all right. Football practice is at Thompson's place for the next 2 weeks. Cheers went up. Groans from the cheerleaders, but Kilsmeyer added, don't worry. I'll talk to Mrs. Bean. I'll get cheer practice moved there too. Just like that. It was a done deal. By mid-September, all 3 mazes were cut and ready. The students made some money, got free admission once we opened, and gave me plenty of feedback. They suggested quick exit routes for those who panicked, checkpoints with riddles and clues to point the way. But the best idea came from a cheerleader. She said, Brett, you know what would be super scary?
I asked her what that was.
Have some of us dress up like scarecrows, stand frozen on poles inside the maze, and every hour we climb down and give chase. If we tag someone, they have to leave through the nearest exit and start over. The idea stuck. I built wooden stands tall enough to hide in the corn, but with a realistic pole to make it look like the dressed-up scarecrow was hanging from it. The first time we tested it, I knew. That was going to be the thing people remembered most. Right about the time we finished cutting the mazes, the news came of an escaped convict who'd broken out of a penitentiary in Nevada and made his way north. He was spotted just across the border. They said he was armed, extremely dangerous, and several were killed during his escape. Now talk of curfews and roadblocks was going around. In the end, nothing official came of it. No curfew, no roadblocks. Just the sheriff reminding everyone to stay alert and keep their eyes open. Out here, you tend to handle your own business, and most of us figured if the guy came around, we'd know since we all knew each other, and he'd stick out. So, with that hanging in the air, the corn maze opened. At first it was slow. The first week, we'd get a trickle of cars, families bringing kids for the pumpkin maze, teens daring each other through the UFO section, a few brave souls testing out the dark 20-acre giant. But then word started to spread. By the last weekend of September, it blew up bigger than I'd ever dreamed.
I am glad there wasn't any occupancy restriction on parking because people showed up in droves.
Cars lined up off the road, down the road, crammed into every corner of the farmyard. Walking through, I couldn't believe it. The pumpkin maze was filled with laughing kids. Teens were screaming and running from the scarecrows in the UFO maze.
And the big dark one?
That 20 by 20 acre beast became the star of the show.
People loved it.
They came out with flashlights, holding hands, screaming in the dark, and then rushing out laughing, only to turn around and go right back in.
It was chaos, good chaos.
The kind of thing you never expect to happen on a farm like mine. By the end of that first big weekend, I was riding pretty high. Sunday night, I tallied everything up. That was about $400 in cash. Not bad at all for what had started as a failed corn patch. That's when Mr. Fearson, my old high school AV teacher, came strolling over. He gave me a look and said, "So, Brett, what's your next big move to keep people coming?"
I laughed and said, "What do you mean, my next move? Folks are already showing up in droves." He shook his head.
"This might have been one of your biggest weekends, but give it a couple of weeks. People realize nothing's changed and they'll get bored." It happened down at the Miller Place. They had to bring in bounce houses and food vendors just to keep up.
And I hear they're already planning to ramp things up because you took half their crowd. That stopped me cold.
In my mind, I wasn't in competition with anyone. This whole thing had just been for fun, a way to make use of a worthless field. But hearing him spell it out, I realized I'd built something bigger than I thought. So I asked him, "All right then, you got any suggestions?" He grinned.
That's why I'm here.
The school just purchased new sound equipment for the AV department. I've still got the old stuff, those massive tower speakers from the 80s, taller than most junior high kids.
Nobody'll buy them and they're headed for the dumpster.
Why not put them to use? We can run the speaker wire through your 20-acre maze, hook them up in random spots. My students can record a CD for you, eerie music, growls, screams, and you just play it on repeat. If it rains, no big loss.
And my kids get a hands-on project. I couldn't help but smile. That was genius. All right, I'm in. But just as I said it, we heard screams.
Not the playful kind, like real terrified screams. A pack of teenagers came tearing out of the maze, eyes wide, one girl crying, yelling about some guy in an orange suit chasing them. My stomach dropped. The escaped convict.
That was my first thought. He's here. I'm shut down.
This is it. Within seconds, phones lit up everywhere. People calling the sheriff directly. Not 911, because in a small town you know who to call if you want them fast. And sure enough, within minutes, one of Dad's old friends, a deputy, pulled up and went in with a flashlight. They found the culprit, not the convict, just some old high school senior, a couple of years out, who'd bought a Halloween convict costume at the supermarket in Ridgeview. He thought it'd be funny to spook kids.
Instead, he destroyed part of my maze, sent kids running, and nearly gave me a heart attack. The deputy dragged him out and asked me what I wanted to do.
I told him the kid was banned, and if the damage was too much, I'd make him pay for it. That put the fear into him. He swore up and down he hadn't meant harm, just wanted a laugh. But standing there, a thought clicked in my mind.
Why not lean into it?
If a fake convict costume could scare a crowd like that, imagine what I could do if I invested in a few of my own. Later that night, after the crowds were gone, I walked the maze with just a flashlight.
I wanted to see the damage for myself.
I'd walked it plenty of times before, but never that late. The place felt different in the dark. The stalks leaned heavy, some rows broken where kids had bolted through.
Every step echoed, every breath of wind rattled the leaves like whispers. That's when it really hit me. The maze had changed.
It wasn't just fun anymore. It was starting to feel unsettling. That night, walking through the maze with just my flashlight, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone.
Not just the normal I'm in the dark and it's creepy feeling. I don't know, this was heavier.
like something was watching me from just beyond the beam of my light.
I stopped more than once, turned full circle, but nothing moved except the stalks in the wind.
Still, that thought gnawed at me. If there is something out here, I could be in for it. That's when the idea hit me. Why stop at convict costumes? If I was going to scare people, I was going to go all in. The next morning, Monday, I drove to the Ridgeview supermarket and just about cleaned them out of their Halloween aisle. Scary clowns, werewolves, hockey masks, mechanic jumpsuits with green faces, you name it.
I must have bought 80 costumes in one trip.
I felt a little bad, but I figured they'd restock before the big night. By the end of the day, I'd hung costumes in every section. Different zones in the maze. Clowns in one corner, werewolves in another, masks dangling at dead ends. Every turn looked like something was waiting for you. And even then I still didn't feel like I had enough. Meanwhile, Mr. Fearson and his AV students were out there running wires through the rows. You could hear them laughing and hollering as they startled each other. Some kid would come around a corner and walk face first into one of my costumes, and the whole group would jump. That was in broad daylight, knowing full well what I'd put there. I kept thinking, if it's this good during the day, what's it going to be like at night? I hadn't even advertised the changes yet. I figured I'd just let word of mouth do its thing. And sure enough, by the very next weekend, the crowds remained. Cars lined up down the road, every spot taken, people spilling out into the ditches. Just as staggering as the weekend before. Grandpa, for his part, wasn't thrilled. He was glad I was making money, proud even. But at his age, the noise wore him down. He'd tell me he couldn't sleep for all the screams and music echoing across the fields. It wasn't anger in his voice, more like weary disapproval. The kind of old man thing where he'd shake his head, half smiling, half grumbling. Every weekend I kept adding little things, tweaking the mazes here and there. By mid-October, I put out the word. The last 2 weeks were going to be a bash leading straight into Halloween night. One of my favorite ideas came from high school. We had a teacher with a stuffed skunk tied to a fishing pole. He'd reel it across the hallway the first week of school, and new kids would just about leap out of their shoes.
I figured, why not bring that to the maze?
So I ordered a couple of RC cars, hollowed out stuffed skunks, and let them rip through the corn. They were gold. People laughed 1 second, then screamed the next, when that black and white blur shot across their path. Funny thing was, they ran harder from the skunks than from the scarecrow actors climbing down every hour to give chase. Sometimes I'd hide in the corn, remote in hand, cracking up while folks bolted. Later, I passed the cars off to my buddies and some high school kids. They mostly chased their friends until the trick wore thin, but for a while it was the highlight of the maze. Getting skunked became a badge of honor. People took selfies mid-sprint and posted about it before they even made it out. In the days leading up to Halloween, the crowds were only getting bigger. By the last weekend, I knew Friday and Saturday would be packed. So on the night of October 26th, a Thursday, I decided to walk the maze myself again. It was after 1 in the morning when I stepped into that big 20-acre dark maze.
No lights, just me and a flashlight. At first, it was quiet.
Then I started to hear faint sounds, low growls, strange noises drifting through the rows. My first thought was, great, I left the speakers running again. But after a few minutes, I realized it wasn't the AV students' soundtrack. It wasn't the loops of eerie music or door knocks they'd programmed. This was different. Every so often, I could swear I heard something walking.
Stalks shifting, steps crunching.
Then at the far corner of the maze, it came, a deep, heavy growl, the kind that goes through you. The hairs on my arms stood straight up, and I started shaking right there in the corn. Before I could think, something bolted through the rows, fast, heavy, breaking stalks as it moved.
I yelled out, convinced it was kids sneaking in after hours. Come on, get out of here. It's not funny.
I tried to sound tough, but the truth was I was rattled. I took off running myself, pushing through the corn, not wanting to leave a big trail, but trying to catch whoever it was. The stalk scratched up my arms, stung across my face, and then I realized something worse. I was turned around.
I couldn't see the moon, couldn't find the stars.
No bearings, no idea which way was home. Just walls of dry corn rattling in the dark. Finally, I picked a direction and pushed through. When I broke out, I was standing on the far side of the property, right by old Mr. Johnson's place.
Nobody lived there anymore, but something was off.
The windows were dark, and I couldn't tell if it was a reflection from the distance maze lights or something inside, but there appeared to be two faint lights in the window. Then they moved and were joined by another two much lower. I turned and looked at the maze, but all I saw was corn, and when I looked back at the house, the lights were gone. Now I was already creeped out, but now I felt sick to my stomach.
I wasn't about to stay any longer.
I hurried down Johnson's long gravel drive toward the road, cutting back to my side of the farm. Halfway there, I heard it again.
A growl, not close, but close enough.
I stopped, tried to laugh it off, and yelled, "All right, you kids, have fun in there."
I'll know who you are tomorrow when I see your arms all scratched up.
But as I kept walking every 30 yards or so, it came again.
Always just far enough away to make me wonder if I was being followed. I tried to play it off, even mocked it. If you're going to growl, do it right, I shouted.
Doesn't sound like any dog I ever heard. Still, nothing came out of those rows, just that low, wrong-sounding rumble. By the time I made it back to my yard, I was done. I walked over to the little shed by the well house, flipped the breaker, and cut power to the lights. The whole place went black. I stood there in the dark, looking out across that massive cornfield, and shook my head. "Good luck, whoever you are," I muttered. "Now it's dark. You'll probably scare yourselves more than me. That last weekend before Halloween was the biggest yet. Cars packed my driveway, spilling all the way down toward Old Man Johnson's place. The mazes were flooded with people. So many flashlights in the 20-acre dark maze that it was lit up like daytime in spots. I'd walk the road and just listen.
Roars as the scarecrows climbed down from their poles.
Kids shrieking, teens laughing, the whole place alive. One couple told me they'd driven an hour and a half just to come. "Our mazes back home are the same every year," they said. "People dressed up with chainsaws with no chains, and it's always the same setup. But this is the different we want." By Sunday night, I'd cleared nearly $8,000. Add it all up. Every weekend in September, every night in October, I'd pulled in right around $25,000. Not bad for a failed crop. A side hustle that was turning into a local legend. Monday the 30th and Tuesday the 31st, I didn't expect much.
School nights, trick-or-treating nights.
And sure enough, the crowds thinned. Still decent, but not the madhouse of the weekend. On Halloween, I'd advertised we'd close at 10. By then, families were gone, kids tucked in. The last stragglers, high schoolers mostly, wandered out by 11. By 11:15, the road was clear. Or so I thought. I walked the road to double-check. No cars, no four-wheelers. Then I cut across the yard, flipped the breaker at the shed, and sat on a piece of farm equipment, looking out at the maze. I was tired, proud, and already thinking, if I can grow corn again next year, I'll do it all over. That's when I heard it. A scream. From deep inside the maze. At first, I figured some kids left their buddy behind as a prank. It happens all the time. But then it came again, sharper, frantic, not playful at all. The voice wasn't young. It sounded like an older man. I grabbed my quad, fired it up, and drove straight toward the sound with my spotlight.
I thought whoever it was would see my lights and run toward me.
But by the time I reached the center of the maze, the screams had gone quiet. I killed the engine and sat in the dark. Nothing. Dead silent. Then, off in the distance, a sound rolled across the rows. Guttural, low, wet, like something chewing, tearing, a meaty, smacking sound I'll never forget. My skin crawled.
That wasn't teenagers.
That wasn't anything I wanted to meet unarmed. I fired the quad back up and barreled out of the maze, stalks snapping under the tires. Back at the yard, I looked at my big combine parked in the shed. The thought crossed my mind. I could drive through the field, light it up to see whatever's in there.
I climbed up, ready to turn the key. And that's when I heard my grandpa. He was limping across the yard, waving his arms.
Brett, what in the hell are you firing that thing up for in the middle of the night? I climbed down, rattled. Grandpa, I heard screams.
There's something out there.
It was growling, loud. I heard it the other night too.
I don't think this is kids anymore. He stopped cold. His eyes went wide as silver dollars. I think I need to tell you something, he said. Grandpa, not those old stories again, I groaned.
I've heard them. You and Dad talking about Johnson and creatures in the corn. No, Brett, you don't understand. His voice shook. When I first started growing corn here, back when I was young, I swear on your grandma's name, I saw werewolves in my field. Not just one, two. They'd run on all fours through the stalks, then at the river they'd stand up. Tall, taller than a man, running on two legs down the bank like they owned it. He took a breath, steadying himself. That's why I never grew corn again, because every year I did, those things showed up. I told you, corn brings scary things.
I wasn't joking.
I told Hal Johnson too. He didn't listen.
And he saw them, same as me, same as your dad. I didn't know what to say.
My grandpa, the strongest, most grounded man I knew, was looking at me dead serious. And somewhere out there in the dark, someone was still in my maze. I knew my grandpa wasn't lying. He was about to turn 100 in a month. What reason did he have to spin fairy tales now? Still, I told him we'd talk more in the morning. Right then, I had to figure out who had been screaming. The only way to cover ground fast was the combine. With the cab lights on, I could see over the stalks, light up the field, and feel a little safer behind all that steel. Grandpa hobbled back toward the house, and I climbed up into the big John Deere, easing into the rows. I drove slow, careful. Didn't want to run anyone over if someone really was hurt. I made it to the far side of the maze and still saw nothing. No people, no bodies, no movement. But then my lights caught something strange. A big, hollowed-out spot in the corn, like a bowl pressed flat into the corn. If you've ever seen deer or elk bed down in an alfalfa field, you know the kind of circle I'm talking about.
Farmers hate them. I sure did. I pulled closer.
Maybe it was just deer. But then I remembered the growl. Deer don't growl, that's when I saw them. Eyes, several sets, low and gleaming, staring at me through the stalks.
I slowed down.
My first thought was still people, trespassing kids, maybe huddled down. But when I pushed the tractor forward into the hollowed spot, there was no one there. Just mashed down stalks everywhere, like something massive had rolled and thrashed around. And then, just at the edge of my light,
I caught it. The hindquarters of a huge black dog without a tail vanished into the rows.
Then I wasn't exactly sure, but it looked like that dog turned and looked at me. Then the next thing I knew, its eyes were gleaming at me, but from near the top of the corn stalks. I sat there in the cab, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself I was safe in that big machine. But then the lights swung across another flattened, hallowed section, and my stomach dropped as I drove closer. Blood, a wide swath of it.
Pooled, smeared, soaking into the dirt. Red everywhere. My mind raced.
Somebody didn't make it out of this field tonight. Hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's landline. Yes, he still had one. He answered, groggy, gravel in his voice. I told him to get out here, now, that I'd found a bloody mess in the middle of the maze. 15 minutes later, he rolled up, shotgun in hand, jacket over pajamas, grumbling about being pulled out of bed. I drove him out to the spot the lights illuminated the scene. Brett, he said, I've been dragged out by a stranger. Looks to me like teenagers again. Did you know the beef packing plant down the highway was broken into 2 nights ago? I blinked. No, he nodded. Yeah, somebody stole meat. And they dumped a bunch of what the plant calls blood tubs. That's the excess blood drained from carcasses. And some of them went missing too.
So I think what you got here is just kids dragging that blood out here to give you a scare. I swallowed hard, looked him straight in the eye.
Sheriff.
I saw something.
Sets of eyes glowing in the stalks, and I swear I saw the hindquarters of a dog. Black with a tail, 4 feet at the hip.
That's not a coyote. That's not anything we've got around here. He frowned, shook his head.
No wolves here. No escaped dogs I know of. Nothing rabid.
Brett, you're rattled.
Get some sleep. We'll confirm with the packing plant tomorrow. For now, let's call it a night. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Just nodded, uneasy, and drove out of there. All right. Good night, I said as I parked the tractor. Except I wasn't going to sleep. When he left, I attached the corn header to the combine. 30 feet wide, the road dividers were sharp enough to shear stalks clean. I set the machine at the back fence line by the river and started cutting.
Wide swaths of stalks fell, row after row, until I'd cleared about 100 feet in from the fence line. I was isolating the maze from the fence line and river.
I figured if anything was still in there, I'd just taken away its cover, and if kids tried to sneak back in, they'd think twice when they saw half the field cut down overnight. Plus, I had cut through their little prank spots. By the time I finally parked the tractor, refueled it, and got it ready for later, the sun was coming up. I dragged myself inside, told myself I'd sleep till noon, then get back out there, clean up the maze, pull the speakers, and take down the scarecrow stands.
I wanted it done.
Halloween had been fun, sure, and the money was better than I ever expected, but I was ready for the horseplay and the foolishness to stop. I'd barely been out for 2 hours when the banging started.
Hard, heavy, and urgent.
My phone was buzzing on the nightstand, 6 missed calls, all from the sheriff. I stumbled to the door, still half asleep. He was standing there in full uniform, pale as a ghost. "Brett," he said, "I need to come in. We gotta talk." I yawned, rubbed my eyes. "What's up, Sheriff?" "Let me guess. You talked to the meatpacking plant. They confirmed the blood story, and now you're here keeping me from sleeping."
I was up half the night cutting all that down. He stared at me, grave.
"Oh, please tell me you didn't cut that section out. The one with the blood?" I sighed.
Sure did. I wanted those teenagers out of my field.
"Halloween's over?" He shook his head slowly. "Brett, this isn't teenagers." He stepped inside, lowered his voice. "It's not really widespread news yet. Fish and Wildlife called me first thing this morning. That river in the gully behind your property, you know they planted fish in it this morning, right?"
Everybody knows that, I muttered, still groggy. Well, Dr. Williams. He lives just down the road, works in town. He was out walking it this morning with his fishing gear. He came across something. A body, mangled, fresh, maybe a day, maybe 2.
"We won't know till the coroner's done, but..." My stomach turned.
A body? Who?
The sheriff's eyes darkened.
I think it's that convict.
"The one who escaped from Nevada. What's left of him, anyway. Matches his description. We found a small fire pit, bones from fish, cobs of corn, scraps. Looked like he was living rough, eating out of surrounding fields." I swallowed hard.
And something got him?
The sheriff nodded.
Yeah, ripped him apart. At first I thought bear.
"But Brett..." He stopped, looked me dead in the eye. "It doesn't match a bear attack. The tearing, the tracks, the claw marks. It doesn't line up with anything we know." I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. "Sheriff..."
I told you. I saw eyes out there. Sets of them.
And I swear I saw the hindquarters of something. Big, black, with a long tail. Too tall to be a coyote. Too tall to be a dog. He didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off this time. His jaw tightened. "Then you better tell me everything you saw," he said. And right there I knew this wasn't over. The sheriff sat at my kitchen table while I made a pot of coffee. Neither of us said much until the mugs were steaming in front of us. Finally, he leaned forward and said, "Brett, we need to go back out there, now." So I slid back into my boots, and together we headed to the maze. The morning sun lit the husks gold, rattling in the breeze. I'd already cut wide swaths along the gully side during the night, which meant most of the ground had been chewed over by the tractor. The sheriff had his shotgun under one arm, his face set tight. "Show me that spot from last night." I drove us out there in the tractor, him in the cab beside me, to where that hollowed spot had been the night before. But where I'd remembered red smears and soaked dirt, now there was almost nothing left. Just a few faint, dark streaks clinging to the base of some stalks. The sheriff crouched, brushed a hand through the dirt, and rubbed his fingers together. "This has to be the spot," he said softly. "But there's not much left." We followed what little we could and ended up at the gully, spots leading towards the river. By the time we reached the river, it had all but disappeared. The sheriff stood staring at the bank, jaw tight.
"It's about a 4 of a mile this way," he pointed west.
We followed the river west. A deputy from Fish and Wildlife was there, pale and jumpy, tape already strung around the spot where the convict's body had been found earlier. For a long moment, the sheriff didn't speak. Finally, he looked at me, his face lined and weary. "Brett," he said, "I should have listened last night.
I should have investigated deeper when you called instead of chalking it up to kids." He shook his head.
Now we'll never know exactly what happened in there." I swallowed hard, looking back towards the farm, and thought about what my grandpa had told me about the werewolf. I hoped whatever had come through my maze was finished. After the sheriff left, I sat at the table with my dad and grandpa. My parents had driven out after my grandpa had told them the news. I told them everything.
Every detail.
The screams, the eyes, the black tail, the blood.
I half expected Dad to laugh it off, to tell me I'd scared myself silly.
But he didn't. He sat stone-faced, listening, like he already knew. Grandpa just nodded slowly. "Now you see," he said.
"Now you know why I never grew corn again. I'm glad your grandma isn't here to relive this again." His voice was gravelly, tired.
But there wasn't an ounce of doubt in it. I promised them both I'd get the maze taken down that night, so that afternoon I started pulling it apart. I took down every scarecrow stand, hauled out the lights, reeled in the miles of wire the AV students had strung.
I rolled up speakers and packed them in the shed.
By the time the sun dropped behind the mountains, the field was quiet. Just me, the stalks, and the hum of the combine. With the header on row by row, the corn toppled, swallowed into the machine. Dust swirled in the beams of the cab lights. That's when I saw them again. At first, just movement. Shadows slipping between the stalks at the edge of my light.
I slowed, squinting. And then, clear as day, suddenly one of them broke from the rows.
It was black, massive, and running on all fours. It stopped just long enough for the lights to catch its shape. Then it stood up. Not like a dog rearing back. No. It stood, balanced on 2 legs, its shoulders hunched, its eyes glowing pale, yellow in the dark. It ran upright, vanishing into the stalks. Another followed, then another. Both were much smaller. Each one had a tail. I stopped and called the sheriff. As the phone rang, one appeared on the edge of my lights. It was enormous, bigger than the rest.
I turned my wheel, and as my headlights slowly turned with my combine, they lit up the beast. I swear I saw the thing smile, not a nice smile, but a wicked smile.
It just stood there as the phone kept ringing on the other end. I hung up, nearly dropping the phone. It turned and walked into the corn.
That one, that huge one, didn't have a tail. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. Every hair on my body was standing.
My grandpa's stories, Old Man Johnson's stories, all of it was real. They hadn't been crazy old men. They'd seen exactly what I had just seen. Then they noticed their silhouettes. Against Old Man Johnson's house, they were running towards the gully. I dialed the sheriff again. This time he answered. He came out again and rode in the cab with me. We cut until midnight, the machines growling as loud as my heart. Every time I swung the lights, there was nothing. We didn't see them, but we heard them. By the time I parked the tractor, silence had settled in. We heard howling.
I knew then what I had seen was indeed werewolves, a whole pack of them. But what could I say?
That werewolves ran through my corn maze on Halloween night. That they'd taken an escaped convict and left nothing but scraps? No one besides the sheriff, my grandpa, and my parents would believe me, so I kept it to myself. And to this day, I still don't know if staying quiet was the right choice. I never planted corn again. Not on my land, not on Johnson's place, not anywhere. I went back to wheat, potatoes, alfalfa, safe crops. Crops that don't force things out from below. The sheriff, well, he never pressed me more. Fish and game wrote their reports, but none of it made the papers. Just a story on the evening news. The convict's death was called an animal attack. Case closed. That was the end of it, at least officially. But I know what I saw. I can still see that hulking one in the lights of that tractor, and its sinister smile with its yellow eyes that weren't human, but weren't just animal either. For years, I didn't say a word.
I knew no one would believe me. I barely believed myself.
And the sheriff, he had his own reasons for keeping it quiet. Out here, sometimes silence feels safer than the truth, but I've carried it long enough.
I'm not trying to scare anybody for a laugh. I'm telling this now because
I need people to know, so when you hear stories about things in the cornfields, when somebody swears they saw eyes watching them in the dark, don't be so quick to laugh.
I did once.
My grandpa warned me, old man Johnson warned me, and I didn't listen, and on Halloween night, I learned the hard way. Even now, some nights, when the wind shifts over the gully, I swear I hear stalks breaking where no stalks should be, and I remember corn brings scary things.